Please welcome Noel Anderson.
Thanks, Frank. Appreciate that great introduction. I'm excited to be here with you guys this morning. Talk about a topic that couldn't be more critical. Before I get into that, though, I want to spend just a second talking about my organization, about the American Red Cross. Our mission is to prevent and alleviate suffering in the face of disasters. And we do that by mobilizing the power of volunteers and by the generosity of our donors. In addition to supplying nearly 40% of the nation's blood supply, we teach life-saving courses like CPR and first aid and water safety and other courses. We respond to nearly 60,000 disasters every single year. And those disasters range from single-family house fires to disasters that displace tens of thousands of people each year. And when we respond to those disasters, we're the ones that are providing the sheltering and the feeding and the financial assistance and the mental health and the hope. And it's from that perspective, as a leader in an organization that responds to a disaster every 8 minutes, that I'm here to talk to you guys today. See if I can figure this out. I'm in a room full of ad people, so I have to make sure I get the technology right, or I'm going to know that'll mess things up. The Red Cross is at an unprecedented time in our 140-year history. Our position as a disaster response organization puts us on the front lines of extreme weather. It puts us on the front lines of the climate crisis. The extreme weather that we've witnessed so far has been alarming. They required a level of response from us that we've never seen before. So what we've been working on is we wanted to take dramatic action on 3 fronts. First, we know that we need to build our capacity. There are more frequent and more severe disasters that are occurring right now, and that means for us to be able to provide our sheltering, our feeding, our financial assistance, our mental health, we need to increase the staff, volunteers, resources, infrastructure to be able to continue to do the life-saving response that we do around disasters. Second, vulnerable populations are being disproportionately impacted by this climate crisis. And so we have to adapt our mission to ensure the work that we're doing is directly impacting those vulnerable populations and getting them back on their road to recovery. And finally, we need to reduce our own environmental footprint. We need to reduce our carbon, our waste, and our water footprint so that we're not adding to the climate-caused disasters that are occurring. So let me explain a bit about why we're so motivated to do this. I said that the Red Cross is a mission-driven organization, and that mission is to prevent and alleviate human suffering. Every single day, on the front lines of the climate crisis, throughout the entire country, we're helping families who are struggling to cope with the effects of more severe and more frequent disasters that are hitting them. This isn't something that's happening in the future. It's something that's happening right now. Today and every day, we have staff and volunteers that are witnessing and responding to the struggles that people are having around the climate crisis. We have a tradition at the Red Cross of meeting the needs of historic challenges as they arise. And because of our history and because of our mission, we want to do our part to reduce our environmental footprint. We don't want to contribute to the causes of the climate change and that environmental burden that it's putting on the families that are affected by it. We want to do everything that we can to make sure that we have the capacity and the capability to help the people who are struggling and impacted by this climate crisis. Here's what the increases of extreme weather that looks like from our perspective, from the front lines. These statistics are stunning. First off, I think it's just amazing that in the last 5 years, 4 of the last 5 years, we have had more level 4 and level 5 hurricanes than the last 50 years combined. Heat waves, which is actually the #1 weather-related death in the United States, those have increased from 2 per year in the 1960s to 6 per year in the 2020s. Wildfires are increasing too. In the past 40 years, the annual number of acres burned by wildfires has more than tripled. Extreme rainfall is becoming more common and more intense too. 9 of the top 10 years for extreme participation events have occurred in the last 2 decades. In 2021 alone, more than 40% of Americans, that's 132 million people, lived in a county that was struck by a climate disaster. And of course, you guys have probably already seen the recent tornado outbreaks that have occurred already this year. There's been over 300 confirmed tornadoes so far just this calendar year, We're experiencing the third most active start to our tornado season on record. 68 people have lost their lives so far this year. Hundreds more have been severely injured. Severe storms are occurring and more frequent, and the tornadoes that are forming from them are coming in larger clusters than they ever have before. The other thing that's been really challenging for us is the area in the Midwest and the Great Plains known as Tornado Alley, which historically has had most of the tornadoes occur. It's actually moving eastward. And as that moves eastward, it's into an area of greater population, greater density, greater vulnerability, and where the rate of fatality is going to be higher. As a result of this extreme weather, the Red Cross and humanitarian organizations just like us, we're responding to twice as many disasters as we did just 10 years ago. In recent years, globally, more than 100 million people every single year require humanitarian assistance because of floods and droughts and wildfires. In 2021 alone, there were more than 22 million people who were displaced. They're forced to leave their homes because of a weather-related event. And just in the US in 2020 alone, we had 3.4 million people who were forced to leave their homes due to extreme weather. 12% of those 3.4 million still did not return to their homes after 6 months, and 16% still haven't returned to their homes and may never will. When you're displaced, individuals and families often face loss of livelihood, loss of access to food, health care, affordable housing. This gives rise to the growing and compounding need for humanitarian assistance from organizations like ours at the Red Cross. I mentioned before that the threat of extreme weather really impacts vulnerable populations disproportionately. I want you guys to meet Ashley Wynn. Ashley and her family live in Arcadia, Florida, and their home was severely damaged during Hurricane Ian last year. Ashley's one of 175 million children who are directly impacted by climate-caused disasters every single year. When disasters impact children, they have long-term consequences compared to adults. Children suffer more severe physical effects from disasters because they breathe more air per pound. They have thinner skin. They're more at risk for fluid loss, more at risk for loss of body temperatures. Older people are also more vulnerable. They're more likely to have complex medical conditions that impact their ability to respond to those emergencies or disasters. They're more likely to be dependent on caregivers or intact medical systems that could be damaged during a disaster. And lower income families are also more vulnerable. Did you guys know that 26% of the US population, that's 80 million people, they have less than $400 in emergency savings? And another 38 million people are food insecure. And that means that they lack the access to enough food for every person in their household. So for many low-income families, a disaster like this is a tipping point that can put them into poverty. You know, loss of a week's groceries, loss of a few days of work and the salary that goes along with that, loss of their home, loss of a vehicle. It's something that they can't get back on their feet to recover from. I read an article recently that had a couple stats I thought just were mind-blowing to me. In 2020, the Houston Coalition for the Homeless, they reported that more than 2 years after Hurricane Harvey, 1/10 of Houston's unsheltered population our individuals are homeless because of Hurricane Harvey. And the World Bank estimates that climate change will be responsible for pushing as many as 132 million people into extreme poverty by 2030. By 2030, just 7 years from now. So what I just described to you is what it looks like today. But weather events are increasing, and the trend is that they're going to get much, much worse. So when we look at these charts, I'm trying to show you the disasters per decade, $1 billion disasters. It's one of the ways that we kind of look at disasters. So these are the largest of disasters that we respond to. And when I talk about $1 billion disaster, I'm not talking about our cost at the American Red Cross. I'm talking about the amount of destruction that was occurred by these disasters. You can see the chart on the left. It shows the number of disasters, the frequency. When I talk about more frequent disasters, this is what that's showing. When you look at the chart on the right, it shows you the cost. It's a good stand-in for severity or intensity. These have been counted in inflation-adjusted dollars, but it's pretty clear to me. you can see that the disasters are occurring more frequent. They're becoming more severe, more intense. So just as an example, if you look at the 1980s, from 1980 to 1989, we averaged 3 separate billion-dollar events per year. And they cost $18 billion on average per year. Fast forward to 2010, and this chart's showing us that we had 12 separate billion-dollar events that were happening every single year in 2010 to 2019, costing us on average $82 billion in destruction that they occurred, they did in damage. And just last year in 2022, there were 18 separate events costing $170 billion. That's a $1 billion disaster almost every 20 days. In fact, it's actually the 8th straight year in the United States that we've had double-digit billion-dollar disasters for 8 straight years. If this trend continues, and scientists believe that it will, we're going to be averaging 30 separate billion-dollar disasters by 2030, costing over $200 billion. This is a recipe for unprecedented, chronic humanitarian crisis. Globally, 3.3 billion people live in areas of high vulnerability to climate change. But let's talk about just in the United States. We have a lot of people that are at high risk to climate change. We have 169 people who are at high risk for water stress, so things like droughts. We have 104 million that are high risk for hurricanes, 94 million that are at high risk for extreme rainfall, 92 million at high risk for heat stress, 22 million at high risk for sea level rise, 7 million are high risk for wildfires. In fact, every single region in the United States is at risk for unprecedented climate change extreme weather. And every single county has some sort of climate threat that's already emerged and causing damage or is going to emerge. It's a dire picture, but it's not helpless. We know what's causing this. We know what we need to do to mitigate this. First, scientists do agree that warming temperatures are caused by rising levels of greenhouse gas in our atmosphere, caused by human activity. If you look at this chart, you can see the direct correlation between CO2 emissions and global temperatures. Human emissions have already warmed the climate by nearly 1.1 degrees Celsius. Second, we know that global temperatures play a major role in extreme weather. Think about it. Extreme weather, warmer temperatures, they're going to be directly causing of heat waves, of droughts, of wildfires. Warmer temperatures also increase water vapor. Water vapor is going to lead to extreme rainfall, more severe storms. It's actually the fuel for hurricanes and tornadoes. And warmer temperatures are going to melt glacier ice, which is going to cause sea levels to rise and impact global coastal flooding. The global average warming is expected to reach or exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius within the next few decades. I've told you guys a lot of stats already today, but if you learn one, just have that one in your head. The global average warming is expected to reach or exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius within the next few decades. Scientists also agree that crossing that 1.5 degree threshold is going to risk unleashing far more severe climate change effects and far more extreme weather. But there's one other thing that scientists do agree on, and it's that we can mitigate the worst impacts of the climate crisis. We can reduce the even more extreme weather, but we're going to have to dramatically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So by reducing our emissions, we won't avoid the full impact of extreme weather. In fact, actually, if we stopped all greenhouse gases right now, there's so much carbon in our atmosphere that we'd still experience extreme weather events for the next 2 years. But we would be able to avoid the worst extremes, the most severe impacts, and the catastrophic suffering that we can anticipate to go along with it. And that's why I'm here to talk to you guys today. From where I'm standing on the front lines, I want to appeal to you. There's a quote that I read recently that I absolutely loved. Antonio Gutierrez is the UN Secretary General, and he had a quote right after the Oscars, and I love this quote. The 2022 IPCC report shows the 1.5 degree limit is achievable, but it's going to take a quantum leap in climate action. We have to fast-track climate efforts by every country, in every sector, on every time frame. In short, our world needs climate action on all fronts, everything, everywhere, all at once. If we don't reduce carbon emissions, we're going to see the reality where disasters are so extreme that populations won't be able to adapt. That organizations like the Red Cross won't be able to meet the humanitarian needs that's out there. Disasters, along with heat waves, disease, and famine, they're going to cause more suffering to the poorest and most vulnerable communities who are already bearing the worst part of this climate crisis. But it doesn't have to be that way. I hope that everybody here, I hope that everybody everywhere, companies, governments, individuals, will do our part so we can avoid the worst of this looming crisis. So I'm excited that you guys are all here today. That's the first step. I just want to thank you for what you've already done. Thank you for what I know you're going to do. I know we've got a tight agenda here, but I will be around to answer any questions you might have during breaks and stuff. But thank you so much.